Guided selling from RingDNA makes your entire sales team more effective by revealing exactly what reps should do and when to do it. Guided selling works by transforming sales data into a curated list of prioritized sales actions. So when reps start their day, they'll never again wonder which prospects and accounts or hot inbound leads to reach out to next. Guided selling even shifts reps' priority in response to real-time buying signals. Finally, even new reps can sell like seasoned ones. Let RingDNA be your guide to success. Learn more at ringdna.com/guided selling. That's ringdna.com/guided selling.
Basically, out of, let's say, 10,000 people that attended a webinar, I would exclude all of the people who did not hit ICC, who did not hit ICT, who we are currently selling into, who we've already sold into. And the results are staggering. You go from 10,000 all of a sudden to 200 leads. And it's like, this is what your sales team was talking about. That these leads are quote unquote BS. So they don't call on any of them because they're like, these are BS. So I've re-metriced marketing teams to say, like, I'm not going to ask you to book the meeting and I'm not going to ask you certainly to close the deal. Let's not be a martyr here.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Becc Holland, and Beck's the founder and CEO at Flip the Script. And in this episode, I talk with Becc about the state of sales development. And we talk about some of the big challenges facing the sales development function, including some that perhaps are a bit counterintuitive. Like, do many SaaS companies actually have too much pipeline? You know, that they're trying to work too many opportunities poorly rather than work fewer opportunities more effectively. We'll also dive into the topic of KPIs and try to sort out the really useful metrics from the popular but perhaps useless metrics. Now, all this and much, much more. Before we get to Becc, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it with Becc. Becc, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
When I say Becc, I'm thinking of like, you know, the musician. First time I saw it, it's like,
that's
Becc.
me. That's me.
You. Was that the inspiration for shortening your name?
No, they were inspired by me.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They actually, the band was named Becca, but then Rebecca originally, and then they decided to go to Becc. The beer too. Same story.
Becc beer. I don't think I know Becc beer. Is that a Texas beer?
I feel like every beer is a Texas beer, to be quite frank.
Yeah. Well, there are some good beers down there, that's for sure. So you've been hanging out in Texas during this whole pandemic.
I actually have, yes. So I came home. I typically live in the Bay Area, but in San Francisco downtown, but I came home for quarantine, because I decided I was starting to have a relationship with my kitchen appliances since I live alone. And I'm like, I'm going to burst into tears if I ever have to leave them. This is getting very castaway very quickly. So I think I need to introduce myself to other people.
And your parents were happy to have you back?
It depends on the day.
Yeah, I was going to say, how long did that last?
Yeah, about 15 minutes. We got through half of dinner.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been a big challenge for a lot of people is coming back home and quarantining with your folks. And it's like, seemed like a good idea, but now we've been together for 2 months and I'm ready to kill you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the hierarchy struggle is all off, right? Because you're always going to be a kid whenever you come home, which is fine Absolutely. At Christmas. But then you have to learn how to be an adult when your mommy's doing your laundry, which is interesting.
Yeah, you could do your own laundry.
Yeah, that would be too difficult, I feel like, at this point.
Well, that might be disrupting the flow of things.
Exactly, the ecosystem. I want to keep the ecosystem going. Yeah,
that's what my producer says as well. Yeah. So, here's a question for you. So, you've gone home. What's the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself during the pandemic? Oh,
that's a good question. I think the biggest lesson is that I truly need people around me. And I think I was there beforehand. Like I live alone, and I'm obviously in tech. So like Zoom was my day before and Zoom is my day after. And I think I didn't realize how much interaction I got at work and, different networking events, et cetera.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I can do this thing at home alone. And then after like a week, there was one week where I didn't open my front door, because I was terrified. And I think that I've really deeply learned that it is, that I need people, in my life to truly be happy.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do it. To that point, it's my belief that when it's safe and when employers feel it's safe and then employees feel it's safe, people want to go back to the office.
Yeah.
I think this idea that we've given you flexibility to work from home, and everybody's sort of suddenly taking on this role of like a permanent gig employee to some degree.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not what I want to do. I want to be in the office with my colleagues and my friends and go out for lunch and all those things.
Yeah. And I think it cuts down, whether we know it or not, it does cut down collaboration, right? Because
undoubtedly, yes.
Yeah, like there's just no way around it, right? You just lose some. I mean, you can walk over to Cindy's desk and Cindy's there, and so you inherently just talk, amongst yourselves. And so I think that we're coming to terms with that of, maybe remote all the time isn't what we crave, and we crave a balance. Yeah.
Well, the question will be whether employers feel that that's more important than the savings on real estate they might get from not bringing people back. But
we'll see where the benevolence lies, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure there is any necessarily, but
I did think it was interesting. I was waiting because in Silicon Valley, it's like we one up each other, right? Like that's what you do. And I don't know if that's everywhere, but it's certainly present there in the Bay. And so I was just waiting. I'm like, who's going to pull the trigger on full-time remote? And it's like, it's Slack that went till October and it was, ooh. Mm-hmm. And then Google went, December, and ooh. And then Jack Dorsey comes in and he's like, permanent. And I'm like, there it is.
Well, it's one way to goose your earnings. Yeah.
Right. I'm like, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. I think very few employees think, this is great. Yeah, I want to stay at home while my kids are possibly learning from home or coming back at 2:00 in the afternoon. And,
right.
Yeah.
Right. But interesting to say the least.
Yeah. So before we talk about sales stuff, as I was learning about you, is you've done some serious good works. I mean, you've gone to Haiti and Brazil and Mexico and other places. So
I have.
Tell us about what you were doing in some of those places. I mean, good works.
Oh, well, thank you. I actually have never been asked about that in any kind of content, but I had a knack, or not a knack, but my parents wanted to send me to different countries growing up to make me and help me understand that not everyone lived like us. Mm-hmm. So, and I was a little, not angry, but a little frustrated with it at the time of like, why do I have to spend every single summer in Mexico, with no friends, and like it's hot here and dusty. But basically, since I was 10, my parents, with me, would go down with our entire family, and we would build houses in poverty-struck districts just across the border in Mexico. So we actually did Tecate, Juarez, Rio Bravo, Reynosa, etc. But I did that every summer since I was 10. And then
for the entire summer, or you do it for a few weeks, or what would you do?
Yeah, for a few weeks was the minimum, and then anywhere up to, I ended up doing it for 8 or 9 weeks at some stints. But I did it every summer since I was 10, and that kind of grew into just a love for international, and a love for people, and a love for enabling people and helping people. And I think it was pretty formative for me. But I ended up going to Haiti during, everything that went on. I think
earthquake, disaster relief, right?
So that was 2011 that happened, and then got the opportunity. My brother went over to China for a few years to be an English teacher. And I got to go over there and help him for 4 months in total, travel some of China, and be with him in Fuqing.
What seemed like one of the more remote places that you went to was Manaus, though, in Brazil.
Yes.
So talk about being in the middle.
One.
Talk about being in the middle of nowhere. So
yes.
what were you doing there?
Yeah, so it was the same kind of program with Amazon Outreach was the name of them, and basically you got in a boat and you floated down the Amazon. This is gonna paint a picture that people are gonna think I'm much better than I am, by the way, but it's my fear. But you would get in a boat and you would travel down the Amazon and you would give medical relief supplies, etc., to cities that were on the Amazon. So that was a very interesting experience. So got to do that for I think it was a month in total that I did it.
So you're like on a good sized boat, or you're like on
yeah, I mean, it's not
small outboard motor boats,
it's not exactly a luxury yacht or anything, right. But it was a pretty good sized boat. So I got to do that for about a month, but it was a very, very interesting experience. Each country, obviously is very different. But it was a really formative experience. And I actually got to, at one point, I flew standby to get there. And I wrote a book that I've never published called Standby, and my experience doing that and what I learned even more so, and the traveling to get there than I learned on the Amazon, but both were very formative for me.
Well, tell us some of the stories about the travel that got you there. What did you learn on those?
It broke me. It really broke me.
Yeah, tell us more.
So I think that it broke down for me I had, especially since I spent so much time, you do a certain amount of quote unquote good works for other people, and you start thinking that you're good. Somewhere in there, because it gets kind of addictive, right? Of like, oh, this makes me feel good whenever I give this money away, or if I, help someone, etc. And I think it was pretty formative for me to begin to understand that, A, it makes you better than no one, and B, the people that you're giving it to, you are also no better than, and that we're all, given the right circumstances,
that could be us.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So that is a lifelong lesson for me, but it was ingrained in me on that trip. That wasn't the beginning necessarily, but the last 10 to 15 years for me have been super formative in terms of, understanding that A, that could be me, and that B, whenever someone does something that's I don't necessarily think is whatever, ethical, right, etc., that like I have a litany of those that I have complied with as well. And so, I need to back off and take my judgment hat off that I so easily put on.
Okay. So how does that translate into the work you've done in sales? Do you carry that with you?
I would say in terms of, there's two pieces. I would say the inclination or the love to enable at a bigger scale is from that time period.
Wishing you could help more people. Yes.
Wishing that I could help people. And the second piece that I just covered of learning that I'm no better than others. I'm no lesser than others, but I'm no better than others too, that we're all tied,
Right.
I think was very, very necessary for me, or it's helpful for me coming into the business world, because, sometimes people do bad things, right? They lie or take money from you, or do whatever they've got to do to get a deal across the line. And to understand beforehand that I not only am capable of all of those things, but I have done all of those things, is helpful to take off my, red hot poker to others and only apply it to myself if I'm going to apply it.
And well, that's very interesting. I was wondering if one of the things as well that you sort of take away from it, especially working in the Valley, which is there's no shortage of money there, and the influence of money is working in these places where yes, there's poverty, but to some degree there's people not necessarily in the face of a disaster, but they found happiness in their lives that's not based on material things.
Right.
Is that something you've carried with you as well? And it's interesting how that runs up against sort of the culture you found in the Bay Area.
Yeah. So I think there's not necessarily. I did read a study at one point talking about the correlation of happiness, and it's like, well, how do you really know? What's it
Sure.
based on? Are we diving into, like, how would you test that? But I do think there's not much correlation between money and being truly satisfied and truly happy and fulfilled, and the character that you're building along the way. To me, that's one of the most rewarding things, is when you are different and you notice that you're different and you didn't focus on that and it's not fake, it's real. And you're like, oh, okay, I view that thing differently now. And so I think that that's one of the main esteem builders for people is, your character, and are you making progress, and are you choosing to do something that's a little more difficult, but it's the right thing? And then are you telling no one about it? Is the last piece. Like, the husband comes home or whatever, are you posting that you bought your wife flowers, or are you doing it for the real reasons, the right reasons? So that's kind of the last step of, once I do this thing, am I keeping it to myself, I think is, but one of the most rewarding things is noticing if you do have the luxury of noticing your character progress, then that's, I don't know. I think it's one of the only few things that there are that are real.
Yeah. Well, I mean, exactly. I mean, I remember my parents teaching me when I was young is that, at the end of the day, when you leave the world, the only thing you leave with is your character.
Right. And I think cash can be an inhibitor to that sometimes. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're a bad person, full disclosure to anyone listening, but it can be preventative. And I can kind of give you an example.
Sure.
When I went to college, I didn't know how to do my own laundry.
Not unusual, I think. Yeah.
Right. So, my mom, she enabled me, right? But she also, to a degree, and this is very normal, but disabled me because I didn't know how to do my own laundry. Very typical and normal, but you take that analogy to, money. It's like, oh, okay, well, if I am born into money, et cetera, it's like, do I have to go through the things that build character? And the answer is, in some cases, no. And so it can be harder, from what I've seen, for people with money, especially if it's inherited, it's that's why you run against runners that are your pace or faster, because it builds you and it makes you kind of compete for that. And so it can take away that element of, oh, I don't have to struggle and don't have to go through all these things and don't have to build the character of finishing something that I started, doing what I say I'm going to do, not talking about others, et cetera. Like, a lot of those lessons can be learned. So I think that those, sometimes to a degree, those challenges are a luxury. They're a gift, because they help turn you into something that you weren't necessarily before.
And sort of following on that, and this is a question I'm always curious about in talking to people who've hired people to work for them, is so how do you evaluate character, and how important is it when you're hiring people? Yeah,
I mean, it's always important, right? Like, people are just people. So, I think it needs to, I read something the other day where someone was commenting on that the top two things that they look for are, number one, has this person been a part of something that made them competitive early on, like sports, music, whatever have you, where they had to compete from an early age. And the latter, and more important or indicator of success in his case scenario was, did they overcome something? So whether that was, not being born into money, or, maybe they're a person of color and they've, incurred some different circumstances where they were left out, or addiction, or, alcoholism, et cetera. Like, was there something that you had to overcome? And that one of those variables is great. And if a person has both, then they're a unicorn, because they understand what it's like to be competitive. They understand what it's like to be accountable, and they understand what it takes to make it happen. To take that challenge upon themselves, and just, make the math work, so to speak. So I thought that was really interesting.
Well, I guarantee you that someplace at some time in some interview, usually some person that said that, yeah, the challenge I overcame was having too much.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And this, it's I was malformed as a result of that, and had to overcome having everything handed to me, and learning that I had to go out and earn it myself.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like, it's like, okay, I don't want your money, not because I'm mad, but because I need to. I'll never forget when I was, I think I was 12, and I went on a run with my dad and a couple of his work friends, and we were right near the end of the run. It was like a 5-mile run. And I actually told him this story a couple weeks ago, and he vaguely remembered it. But right near the end of the run, I said, "Dad, I want to quit. Like, you guys are going too fast. Like, it's been 5 miles. I'm out. Right. Like, my legs are half the size of yours. You're 6'5". And I remember him saying, "You have to finish." And I said, "Why?" I was all mad. I said, "Why?" He said, "It builds character."
Yeah, that was a standard answer when I was growing up as well.
Right. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'll never forget that moment. And I'm like, he's right. I did struggle for the last, whatever, half of a mile, but I made it. And he empowered me to teach myself that with enough something, that I can make it happen. So I think that can be a gift to people, especially early on, but, all throughout their life.
Yeah. No, I think the lessons from parents are really strong. And I jokingly say sometimes about some of the bad sales behaviors that we see, is someone will ask me, well, what do you think is the cause of this? And I say, bad parenting.
Yeah.
So, and I'm only half joking.
Yeah.
On that.
Joking until you realize that it's real.
That's right. Right. Okay. So you've run sales development at some high profile startups. And so, in your opinion, what is the state of sales development?
It's brutal. Yeah, it's brutal would be one word.
Is it heading in the right direction, in your opinion?
I am doing everything I can to bend it there.
There we go. So the answer is no.
Yes, the answer is no. Yes, right. I mean, I think that it's headed for the right direction in terms of, I've seen people's. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when you've been doing a workout for the last 10 years, and then all of a sudden you find out that workout, for whatever reason, isn't effective. Right. And it makes sense. But you're
you learn something new along the way. Science has evolved or whatever, right?
Right. And you're almost mad about the last 10 years that you struggled and did all these things, and now you understand why you didn't get your goal. And so, I don't know what the percentages are, but in some cases, I've been the person who continued with the bad workout to justify the last 10 years. Right. So it's just an ego thing. And that is the most dangerous and crippling thing, I think, is ego of, well, we're going to do this because it's always been done. We're going to do this because this is best in practice, whatever. And I'm like, well, I've seen studies of, 76% of SDRs aren't hitting quota. And it's like, well, okay, so best in practice.
Well, except you're going to hear back oftentimes from managers. Well, yes, but 24% are.
Right, and it's like, well, okay, we're not there. So
learning the wrong lesson from this situation. Yes.
Right. So I do think that we are getting there in terms of, I think we're getting more and more tired of where it's at, which provides the breeding ground, arguably, for a opportunity for a change. So I do think that we're getting there in terms of, I do think the right components are being worked in to where, people, now whether they'll be open to a different solution, even though it's not best, quote unquote, best in practice, but that gets them their goal, is a whole nother can of worms.
Right.
But I do think we're getting there in terms of the, we're tired of, we're sick of not seeing, hitting our result. And I think we're all assuming At least from what I've seen. I picked my head up originally whenever I started deploying a number of different, quote unquote, different theories. I picked my head up from what we were doing on my first MarTech company. And I'm like, surely someone has figured this out. Like, surely I'm just crazy and in the wrong. So I just started banging down doors, enterprise, mid-market, SMB. And I'm like, what are you doing? Is it working? What's your data look like, et cetera? And they're like, who is this girl? Like, why is she asking me all these very intimate questions? And I was just convinced. I'm like, someone surely has the answer and I'm the insane one. And come to find out, I'm like, oh, programs were in a great case scenario where my program was at. And the majority of them were falling behind even the metric that I had run against before I was deploying most of this new theory. So TLDR, long-winded question, I do think that we're getting to the point where we've had enough. And I hope and lie in bed at night thinking about that we are innovative enough and open-minded enough to let that 10-year workout go and take the next step.
Okay. So summarize for us, what is the 10-year-old workout that's currently happening in sales development? What are the things that we've grown tired of? Yeah.
So I don't know if we've grown tired of the outcome. I don't know if we've grown tired of any of the inputs, but we have certainly grown tired with the outcome. So I think the inputs that lead up to it, I'd say number one, if I had to boil it down to 3 or 4, I'd say number one is the relationship between marketing and SDR. I think is a big gap for us. The relationship between SDR and sales, KPI systems and how we're metricing people. And the last one and the only quote unquote tactical one that I would suggest would be that we are not personalizing. We don't know who our buyer is, even though our buyer wants us to know who they are.
Right. So, all right, let's dig into a couple of those. In your opinion, where do SDRs belong?
You mean in terms of who they roll up to?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're a peer with marketing and sales. So I do believe, and I've had the luxury of working for revenue leaders in the past, and that made the most sense. There's some decisions that aren't good for sales teams, but they're good for the SDR team. There's some decisions that are not great for the SDR team, but are good for the sales team. And I think you need someone who's looking at the entire funnel, who is quote unquote an arbitrator of that conversation. So I do believe that a marketing head and an SDR head and a sales head are all three peers in a very appropriate funnel.
So a third organization.
Yes, exactly. Well, if we're going to create a third role, I'm not, by the way, necessarily arguing, certainly in some case scenarios, that you should have SDR. Sometimes full cycle is the answer.
Right.
But if you're going to have one, I do think that it can be toxic for them to roll up to either. There are negative ramifications to rolling up to sales or marketing for SDR.
Interesting.
Programs.
So I think this is the first time I've heard this advocated is that SDRs need to be their own organization.
Yes.
And so interesting. And why?
Well, I mean, if I had to break it down, I've answered to both. I've answered to marketing and sales, and I've answered to revenue also. When I was answering to marketing programs, and I'm not certainly not talking about anyone in specific.
Just in case you're listening.
Yeah, just in case you're listening, all of my former employers, sweat, gulp. No, but when I've rolled up to marketing or teams that I've seen that roll up to marketing, what ends up happening is, marketing it has increasingly been metriced or increased heat on producing ROI.
Right.
So they go to an event, and they invest $50,000 in the event. And so from the C-level, whether that's CMO or not, you will get, they want to prove the ROI from that event. So they'll have you call on, let's say you have 10,000 leads from the event. They'll have you call on all of them very, very aggressively. When you say these leads aren't great, they'll say, we'll call them more.
That's always the answer.
Right. Because they want to prove the ROI of the event, which makes sense. And so you'll see a lot of marketers do a lot of things, but one of the things they do primarily is, oh, well, nothing has to necessarily be tied to ROI. And so, the KPIs, it's not the marketer that's broken, it's the system that's broken. And so SDR can have some negative ramifications of all of a sudden I'm calling on, a lead that doesn't hit ICC, ideal customer company, or ICT, ideal customer title. It's an intern over at, an SMB company that's part of the product discipline when we sell into sales. But marketing doesn't have a solution for that. So they just say, call them more whenever it would be, even if they did book that intern, sales wouldn't take it. So that's an example.
Well, you hope they wouldn't take it.
Right.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden SDRs spent their time on something that didn't yield the result that they wanted. So even if they did book it, it wasn't qualified. And so we're up a creek in the marketing case.
Yeah.
So that's an example of what can happen on the marketing side. So a lot that I've done to clean up the marketing process is redefining MQL to mean someone who hits. I did away with ICP because ICP typically is bereft of title.
Right.
So I broke it down to ICC and ICT, customer company and customer title. And basically out of, let's say 10,000 people that, attended a webinar, I would exclude all of the people who did not hit ICC, who did not hit ICT, who we are currently selling into, who we've already sold into. And the results are staggering. You go from 10,000 all of a sudden to 200 leads. And it's like, this is what your sales team was talking about, that these leads are quote unquote BS. So they don't call on any of them because they're like, these are BS. So I've re-metriced marketing teams to say, like, I'm not going to ask you to book the meeting and I'm not going to ask you certainly to close the deal. Let's not be a martyr here. Your new KPI is on brand and lead generate brand and lead generation, 25% on brand, meaning 10,000 is your number. So 10,000 people now know, who Oracle is, if I'm at Oracle, but the lion's share, 75% of your KPI is out of those 10,000 who is someone that we want to sell into, who we haven't already, are the two questions I'm asking. And so that number is 200. Right. So now all of a sudden you see a marketing team being aggressive about increasing the 200 number as opposed to 10,000, and they're not so comfortable. So, long story short, whenever you have SDR answering into marketing, they inherit a lot of the agendas and quote unquote false activity that aren't going to give them the results that they want, or the sales team the results that they want, or the org the revenue results that they want, because of the answering structure. Yeah.
But that same thing could exist, though, even if they're reporting for sales. I mean, you still could get an influx of leads that really don't deserve consideration at that point in time.
Right. So the exact same thing, it's just a mirrored, you just have to think about how people are metriced and what their agenda is based on that metric. But, when you answer into sales, again, I've seen, if I'm an AE and I am not hitting quota, then I want to point somewhere. It's either you or me, right?
So, it's definitely not me.
Right. And it's not me. So I want to at least delay my churn. So I'm going to point somewhere. And the only logical spot to point is SDR. So if you are, metricing on any kind of, if AEs are qualifying appointments, saying that they're qualified, especially if it's on subjective criteria, and keep in mind, they're measured on conversion, sales cycle, and quota. So if I'm not hitting quota, I'm going to point to the SDR team, number one. Number two, if I'm measured on conversion, I'm going to want to be the king or queen of conversion. So I'm only going to convert right before the deal closes to look like a princess. And then, the third is sales cycle. So inherently AE teams, and again, shout out to AEs, I love them. I'm like, this is a broken system. It's not about the account executive and the SDR not getting along. Don't, save your beer money. This is not a personality thing. But AEs, have incentive to decline and disqualify SDR appointments unless you put some kind of objective criteria in place of, did they hit these 4 things? And let's not talk about need as one of them, or, ask them budget questions, or are they the decision maker on the first date to scare our prospects away because of process. But you have negative ramifications on the sales side too. Of they are, even if I'm hitting quota as an account executive, I will always want more and better pipeline. Or I'm not an AE.
Well, but it seems like the counterpoint, though, when you're talking about the A's, or of course they'll disqualify and so on, is that by the same token, many of them are also being metriced on their pipeline coverage ratios.
Right.
So it's almost like there's an incentive to be less discerning about what becomes an accepted lead and a qualified opportunity. Yeah.
So I've seen it swing both ways, but it's relationship with SDR is, there's a lot of case scenarios where it's like, okay, in the beginning, if I have no pipeline, I'm going to take anything, right? I'm just going to take an appointment with anything. If you start stacking up my calendar, all of a sudden the bar just starts raising. I'm only going to take these really, really high, great opportunities as the bar raises, and I'm never going to tell you to shut off pipeline. So I do think that there needs to be some counter checks and balances on both sides of the funnel to make it a funnel. Because I've never walked into an organization and been like, oh, this is a real funnel.
Yeah.
This is an actual funnel.
Right.
So it's, I've even talked to programs where the conversion ratios of like same types of leads being sent over from SDR, the qualification ratios or conversion rates varied from 10% with one rep to 90% for the next rep over a 2-year period, meaning it's a significant data set. Like we're not talking about a week.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised you talk about a 2-year period. I'm surprised the one that accepted 90% of them was still there after that period of time.
Like, who's 90 and who's 10, and how can we get a mix?
Well, along those lines, let me ask this question. So, again, in your mind, what's sort of the one KPI that everyone uses that you think is totally useless?
Oh, there's so many, Andy. There's so many.
Well, give us your favorite. And why?
Can I give you my top 2 favorites?
Oh, sure. Sure.
It's kind of like ice cream flavors. I can't limit it down to one.
You're choosing chocolate and vanilla. Okay, yeah.
On the marketing side of the house, I would say I'm probably going to end up giving you 3. MQL, as defined as someone who downloads content or attends a webinar, and that being my quote unquote KPI.
And so why is that useless?
Because the majority of MQLs they aren't an indicator of, is this person qualified and do we want to sell into this person? And so the associated principle typically is like, okay, most aggressive case scenario, I'm metriced on closed won revenue off of these leads. That's very rare though. Most people they would say marketing's quote unquote pipeline is if an intern from Oracle downloads a piece of content, well, Oracle's worth $1 billion as a sale, hypothetically, if it closed. So all of a sudden, I just provided you $1 billion in pipeline, and everyone in marketing is going out at 2 p.m. on a Thursday to get pina coladas. They just hit their goal.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I've just pictured all these marketing types turning this program off. But yeah, go ahead.
No, absolutely. And again, it's like I always see the same thing. Marketing is like cheering. They're like, we always hit our KPI, and then sales development's cheering a little bit less, but they're still cheering. And then marketing or sales is just bawling their eyes out. And the VP of sales is turned because I don't know, he or she couldn't learn how to sell is the backing. So that would be my number 1.
That's number 1. All right. Yeah. Number 2.
2, the next KPI that's my most favorite in terms of how dysfunctional it is when teams round robin inbound demo requests, the logic being that these are highest buyer intent leads, and 90% of our whatever close one deals is off of inbound. So they round robin the inbound across the reps based on geo and give them a meeting quota. That's my second favorite.
Interesting. Okay, so let's walk through that. So what strikes you as off on that?
I'd say the top three things that strike me as off of it is number one, especially if you do it based on geo, and I'll give you an example. I worked for a company that was based in Berlin. Mm-hmm. They did aggressive marketing efforts in Berlin. I ran a team in multiple geos. So we were on a round robin quota for meeting total. So the Berlin reps are killing it because they're getting tons of demo requests.
Local requests, right.
Right. And especially with the argument of, well, they speak German, and so these prospects do too. And so the German reps were absolutely killing their numbers. And then US reps and APAC reps are like trying to make up the delta on outbound. Outbound is 15,000 times harder. And so it's like, okay, the German rep, over like the top quote unquote performer for Germany had set one outbound meeting in like 3 months. And the US team, and the APAC team had gotten anywhere from 7 to 10. But because of the inbound line that produced 30, for this inbound rep, all of a sudden the German rep looks amazing. And I'll never forget, we're at the meeting where they say like, hey, this giant deal closed and it's from this German rep. And hey, can you tell us what you did? Like, can you tell us the wizardry was the term. Yeah, was the term that they used. They said, can you tell us the magic that you did to get this deal? And he's like, I emailed him and set up a time.
Yeah. And
like the meeting was over. And he was honest about it, but I'm like, it gives you no indication. If you round robin, especially according to geo, it gives you no indication on everything that a KPI system should indicate. Right. Who's your best rep, who's working the hardest, and who's the most skilled. It wipes out all three of those. And you have to double pay for a marketing lead.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree 100% on that. All right. So your third one.
Third one, I would say I'm debating on whether to go SDR specific or sales specific.
Go sales.
Yeah, I would say the third one would be whenever sales reps are measured on net new ARR up to 6 months, and that the CSM gets the expansion business post 6 months.
Yeah, that's one that I've heard a lot. So what would you do differently?
I have watched it, Andy.
Yeah.
I have watched a CSM walk up to me. He was French, and he was like, so this opportunity is going to, sorry, I do a terrible French accent.
No, it's amusing. Go ahead.
He's like, so there's this massive expansion opportunity that's going to close, but it's 5 months and 28 days. So I'm going to push it. I told the prospect to push.
Yeah.
So they're measured on expansion post 6 months. And so they literally told a prospect that they would not sell to them the expansion deal until 3 days from them so that they could get credit. So what I do differently, it's like, well, it depends on your setup. There's AMRM. It depends on if you have an AMRM cross-sell, upsell, resell team. If I had CSM and AE only, it depend on multiple different variables, but I basically would do something of like, okay, the AE is based off of, they can retire their quota in one of two ways, the land or the expand. And CSM can do the same thing, but for expansion or renewal. So all of a sudden you see the AE and CSM working together. You aren't double paying, but you are measuring them against quotas of like, hey, you can either go hunt a new fish. Like if you just close LinkedIn and you have an inkling to go close, a $20,000 deal at Microsoft that takes you 8 months, to close, it's like, go do it. Or you could do the easier thing and make sure that customer is being taken care of. Make sure that you sell the deal appropriately and that you set them up for success and don't make promises you can't keep. So that you don't churn that deal, and then also that you deliver on the goal that they bought your software for. So I've seen a myriad of different software companies, and they're like, oh, well, it's not my necessarily goal, or it's not my responsibility to help someone achieve the outcome that they sought to achieve with buying my software. I'm like, well, you're looking at it wrong. It's your opportunity.
Yeah. You're saying the AE is saying that.
Right. So, well, companies in general, they're like, well, you buy whatever piece of software, and it's not necessarily my goal to help bridge you to the outcome. And I'm like, well, people are trying to impact buy more than ever.
Yeah.
So it's like, focus on the impact and know what their goal was in buying whatever software they're going to, like, I'll use my last company, Chorus. Know why they're buying Chorus. Usually it's quota attainment. So help them drive quota attainment.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say that's the biggest metric when it comes to sales, that I would probably, again, depends on the program segment, et cetera, but I would metric an AE of like, you can do land or expansion to retire quota, and CSM, same thing, but with expansion or renewal. So you find the CSM not ignoring other deals to go for the expansion, but weighing the differences as if they're a CRO. Because all of a sudden they're KPI'd as a CRO, essentially. Yeah,
it's interesting because I've worked in environments where we've had the same setup, and it seems like you're working with two different definitions of expansion. And because, what I'd want the AEs to do is define what I call net new opportunities in that account, right? Different divisions,
right?
So on. So it was, in essence, a new sale. Right. Just because you were using it in one division doesn't mean they were bound to use your product in another division. So if you could if you could discover those opportunities, then I'd want the AE to stay involved because that's what they're good at, developing new opportunities.
Right. And you'll see them earnesting up a little bit in the sales cycle of like, I'm not so keen to sell a deal that's going to churn because, all of a sudden, I'm based on the value of this contract long term, and so I'm starting to hunt deals where it makes the most sense from a rev perspective, with churn in mind. So I've seen, essentially 4 different types of expansion sale. Of I'm upselling to the core user, like Chorus, we had AEs,
sure,
we sell to more AEs, or you're selling additional features is the second kind of like, I'm going to sell them some kind of suite, or I'm going to sell the third kind as a different discipline within the same company. Mm-hmm. So BDR2 and CSM2 at Chorus, or the last one is what you mentioned of like, I sold into LinkedIn marketing solutions and now all of a sudden I got to sell into LinkedIn talent solutions, which if it's just a CSM on the deal, it's like, it's a different sale. It's a whole different sale.
You don't leverage the relationship at all. Yeah.
Right. So if I'm not metriced correctly, the AE or the CSM in an appropriate manner, all of a sudden, marketing solutions, even though it is an opportunity and it's easier because I have internal referral. If we have, they're happy. It's going unsold just because of the way that we're comping and structuring the KPI.
Interesting. Okay. Well, last question for you. Unfortunately, I would love to go deeper on that, but we're running a little bit out of time. So tell us about your new venture.
Oh, yes. So if you haven't already had enough of me.
If you want more Becc Holland.
Everyone's like, I don't, Andy, I don't. So TLDR, I started a series when I was at one of my former companies, G2, that just started as with me, a couple of pizza boxes with some buddies and a dream. And really it was, can we help? Can we help more reps hit quota? And so we started this kind of rogue organic, training series where I just trained reps after hours. I did 5 sessions and all of a sudden we had 600 registrants in an hour and packed out the building. So that's where it started. And we coined it. I'll never forget one day an SDR said, you have to name it. And I said, like what? And he said, flip the script. And I said, what script? And he goes, well, I think you're flipping over a lot of things. So it stuck, and I took that with me to Chorus. But my new venture is basically, so I LLC'd Flip the Script is now a real company, no matter what my dad says. I've nicknamed my dad my CTO.
There you go.
So I'm starting a basically free website where you can come and you can get free training on all kinds of different topics, whether that's cold calling, cold emailing, objection handling, how to personalize at scale, expansion selling, etc. But it's gonna, the vision is, how can we help, I just have this rep in my head for some reason that's in like New Jersey, like Hoboken, who is at the office at 7 p.m., isn't hitting quota and doesn't know why, and wants help and has drive and doesn't have the keys to get there. So this is essentially, a website for, anyone and everyone who wants to learn, including myself, of how can we help people hit more quota than ever before, and hopefully make a delta and make an impact on the industry to turn sales into something different and turn it back into a game where that people can win.
And it's free, you said.
It is.
So how do you make money?
I don't yet.
All right.
Ask my CTO.
This is an extension of your good works.
Ask my CTO. No. So essentially, long story short, I have had some incredible sponsors that wanted to be a part of it, and so we really wanted to. I had the heart, and so did they, to shift the quote unquote burden of the payment back onto companies. And so I have several sponsors so far. I can't name them yet, but several very, very incredible orgs, incredible leadership teams. That rolled the dice and bit the bullet and invested. I'm almost viewing it, I told them, as a seed round, but essentially it's not free to anyone. It's just free to everyone who's consuming it, right? So so I wanted to turn it into true KPI system, girl. I wanted to turn it into, how can we build a community where it's free for the person on the other end? Because the people who want training the most typically are the people who don't hold the budget for it.
Right.
So I wanted to democratize the whole thing and say, like, okay, and that community is very, very valuable to a certain, group of sponsors.
Sure,
so how can we help both parties through something like this? So it's going to be free to anyone. All they'll need is a company email. Wow.
Okay. So like the way Facebook started, you need an EDU email.
Right. Exactly. You will need a company email as the one requirement. Okay.
And this launches when?
It is October 13th. I'm going to be doing several different sections. Three I can announce, or two markably, but I'm going to do one section, which is core videos. It's evergreen topics, cold calling, cold emailing, objection handling, etc. And then I'm going to do the second one that I can talk about is seasons. So I'm going to pick a topic and do 20 videos on that topic. So the first season, I basically reshot all the videos that I did while I was at Chorus, beefed them up and enriched them. And that season is pilot. And then season 2, I'm going to start releasing on October 13th when the website goes live.
Got it. And the red streak in the hair is for which season?
I hope people are listening to this after launch.
That's right. So we're teasing it.
Season 2. Season 2. All
right.
Season 2 is going to, every single one of them is going to be color themed.
Got it.
So season 2, that is going to be the change for season 2.
Perfect. So if people want to find out more about this, where can they go?
Yes, they can go to flipthescript.co and you can pre-register and to see behind the scenes updates and what we're up to. Post-launch, same site, flipthescript.co, and everything will be live.
Perfect. All right, Becc, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. We didn't get through the half we were going to talk about. We'll have you back. We'll do it again.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. I had a lot of fun.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank Becc Holland for sharing her insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or review, let us know how we're doing, well, we'd certainly appreciate that. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. So thank you for your help. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. RingDNA is the leading sales enablement platform that uses AI to help scale business growth. Trusted by the top companies across the globe, RingDNA offers a suite of powerful tools for every sales role. The RingDNA Dialer radically improves sales productivity and call connection rates, while guided selling helps reps know exactly what to do and when to do it. Conversation AI uses artificial intelligence to surface the most impactful coaching opportunities in real time. So, no matter where your team is working from, the RingDNA platform can help them exponentially increase call connections, opportunities, and revenue. Learn more at ringdna.com/platform. That's ringdna.com/platform.